So Israel was a new nation in a new land, and at first life went pretty well under the law of Moses. Israel generally adhered to the law, and when they did make mistakes, they then humbly went to God with their sacrifices to be ceremonially cleansed. Because they were trying to obey the law, their nation experienced the blessing of prosperity, health, and safety that had been promised to them under their covenant with God. Remember, under that covenant, God promised a threefold blessing for obedience and a threefold curse for disobedience. And in fact, an early pinnacle was reached under this system with the righteous rulership of King David. Unfortunately though, things were never quite that good again. From the glorious heights of David's reign, they soon plunged into a decline, turning from God to follow pagan idols. As soon as they abandoned their moral reference point, immorality soon followed, and evil began to spread throughout the land. Though God was patient with them and gave them several warnings ahead of time, their behavior did not improve, and the curses of the covenant then began to come into play. Instead of prosperity, health, and safety, Israel began experiencing poverty, sickness, and terror. Foreign nations invaded and destroyed their city walls, scattering the people from their homes. Sickness and disease ravaged the land, and depression and despair gripped the hearts of the people. Eventually, they ended up in bondage. The Bible says, "Disaster came upon the people of Israel because they worshipped other gods. They sinned against the Lord their God who had brought them safely out of Egypt. They built pagan shrines. They even sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. They consulted fortune tellers and practiced sorcery and sold themselves to evil, arousing the Lord's anger. So Israel was exiled from their land." When we consider that God had told them up front that obedience to the law would lead to blessing and disobedience would lead to curses, it seems like insanity that they would choose to be disobedient anyway. Who would deliberately choose curses over blessing? If you have two paths in front of you and one leads to blessing and the other to curses, then why would you choose the one that leads to the curse? But you'll remember that our inherent heart corruption means that we often just can't help it. Jeremiah wrote, "The heart is more deceitful than all else and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" And it's true. Who can understand why a married man gives up his wife and family for one selfish night of adultery? Often he doesn't even understand his own actions. He knows that he'll regret it for the rest of his life, yet he's consumed with lust in that moment and does it anyway. He chooses the curse. How many people know that if they go out and drink all night, they'll wake up with a terrible hangover the next day? They know this, and yet they do it anyway. They choose the curse. How many people know that they're going to hurt someone else if they lash out in anger, and yet they do it anyway? They choose the curse. How many people have regrets because they inexplicably did something that they knew was wrong? We often can't understand our own behavior. We often know that there's a curse ahead on a path of sin, and yet we take that path anyway. We choose the curse. Paul describes this frustrating phenomenon when he says, "I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it." And so it was with Israel. The law of Moses had proven ineffective against the sin living within their hearts. It had shown people the midday sky, but in their hearts they still preferred the darkness. It had shown them what a good apple looks like, but in their hearts they loved their rotten cores. They now knew what good looked like, but they still had no desire to choose it. God described the incurable nature of the disease within their heart, saying, "Your injury is incurable, a terrible wound. There is no one to plead your cause or to bind up your injury. No medicine can heal you." The law can never impart righteousness. The law can never transform their hearts. And so things started to look really quite bleak for the nation of Israel. It seemed like slavery to their sinful nature would mean endless poverty, sickness, and terror. And indeed, it seemed like things were hopeless for the whole of mankind, because in the end, we all share in this affliction. We all have sinful natures.